Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a number of people already here with us this morning. I'm sure additional people will start to trickle into the room. My name is Gina Davis. I am an education program specialist with the Maryland Department of Labor. We're really excited to get started with the first session in our second virtual training institute. If you don't mind, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box, just put your name and the program that you're from, and we'll start to read through those. Additionally, I'm going to launch a quick poll so that we can see what roles everyone plays. And I apologize if you hear my little person in the background. Great. Okay, well now, it looks like a majority of the people that we have are ESL instructors. So welcome some of our program administrators, ABE, ESL instructors, and I'm assuming the others probably individuals from my team. But without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Katie and Nikki. They are two fabulous instructors and instructional specialists from Howard Community College. So Katie, kicking it to you.
All right. Hope you guys are all doing well this morning. Welcome to today's session, our rigorous instruction. Like Gina said, my name is Katie Edwards, and I am the Grant Program Coordinator at Howard Community College's English Language Center. And Nikki, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Good morning. I'm Nikki Sappington, and I'm the Grant Support Coordinator at Howard Community College.
So as we are going through this presentation, I'd love to hear what brought you here today. If you want, you can share your reasons in the chat box. I'm not sure if anyone is filling that out right now because I don't actually see anything, so I don't know if I'm supposed to or not. So as far as this presentation, I think that a lot of times teachers get nervous about this word rigor. Rigor sounds really daunting. So I just want to thank you first for showing up and give you a little bit of background. Most of this conversation that we'll be having today stems from some discussions we've been having with our instructors at Howard Community College, which in turn was inspired by a variety of different things like WIOA, the college and career readiness standards, workshops that we've attended by Sierra Lynn, the author of Future Textbooks, and Betsy Parrish. So we have a lot of material to cover with our students. We got textbooks crammed with information, content standards to cover, plus things your students are asking for. Not even to mention all of the things that your students have going on, things like the fact that they're SLAIF, students with limited or interrupted formal education, the fact that they're working multiple jobs. And this is even before we start thinking about the implications of the coronavirus and remote learning. So why would we want to make acquiring English more difficult for students? I'll be honest, rigorous instruction sounds like making things difficult just because, and only that it's only for students who are planning on going to college, which, if we're honest, isn't necessarily a huge proportion of our students. I think this quote about from Nason, which is a discussion on rigor, is a great way to start it out. That a lot of times, why am I going to do this to make life more difficult for students? But I love this rest of the quote, and I think it kind of dovetails very nicely into the conversation. So an instructor says that just this last week at work, I had one student whose car was stolen and another student who wanted help obtaining and filling out paperwork to lease her upstairs apartment to her brother-in-law. Another student's mother-in-law flew in from Iraq to live with them. Yesterday, a student needed to leave class early to speak with his mortgage company about escrow money that was returned to him rather than applied to principal. Talk about some complex language demands. So our students are continually faced with complex language demands in a variety of contexts. In academics, yes, but also in their career and personal lives, as is demonstrated by that quote. We want and need to provide instruction that equips them to handle those demands, even at the very beginning levels. So in today's presentation, we're going to look at 3 aspects of rigorous instruction. And they are, there we go. Academic language, critical thinking, and language strategies. So we're going to look at these 3. Obviously, there are many more standards. And we'll give a few concrete examples of how we can just tweak lessons to better address the needs of learners. So throughout this presentation too, we're going to also directly address the reality that many of us may be doing remote instruction, whether that's now or in the fall. And we're going to provide some ways to adapt these for remote learning as well. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box and share ideas and takeaways that you might have. It looks like I cannot see what's in the chat, but Gina will help us. All right.
Okay, I'm going to start us off with talking about academic language. As Katie mentioned, the amount of things we need to cover with our students is really daunting, but this academic language piece is very important to our students. They need it, and it's not just for students who are going to pursue higher education. The same language register is found in the workplace and in those complex life situations that Katie mentioned. And all of our students need these words. And the other way to look at it is we don't need to wait till students get to a higher level to start teaching it, because our students are running into this language now. Often, however, our textbooks mostly teach vocabulary by topic or theme, like for example, a unit on health or a unit on houses. This is fine, and this vocabulary is certainly needed for our students, but we can also push in some more academic language for them without redoing our entire lessons or redoing our entire textbooks. So one doable suggestion we found is to replace some of your everyday classroom language with more academic language. So try trading out some of these common classroom instructions with a more academic synonym. So some examples we saw, instead of asking students to answer, they can respond. Instead of using finish, complete, restate instead of repeat, discuss instead of talk about, report instead of share, and consider instead of think about. Now, we wouldn't recommend replacing all of these words at once with no explicit instruction in your classroom, but adding in 1 or 2 of these words every few weeks and explicitly teaching students their meaning can get additional academic words into their vocabulary without necessitating whole additional lessons. These are words that we say as teachers multiple times in every classroom. So imagine just all the built-in repetition you can get with these words. Also, some of the academic language supports critical thinking activities, which we'll talk about in a few moments. So you can get in the habit of asking students to cite their evidence. When you're talking about text or pictures, if you ask students a question about a picture and they say the answer, you can say, cite your evidence. How do you know? And ask students to support their opinions. Get used to using these phrases in the classroom. Okay. Another really neat resource that we found when we were looking into this topic is from the Oxford Picture Dictionary College and Career Readiness Toolkit. So the full link is here in the bottom right, and at some point I know Gina will be able to send this out to everybody, but we wanted to pull out a page to show you as an example. So it lists all the topics found in the Oxford Picture Dictionary, like here in the left column. This is just one page. It's mostly about food and restaurant related activities. So what I like is these topics in the Oxford Picture Dictionary correspond a lot to the units and the chapters in a lot of our ESL textbooks. And then per topic, it makes suggestions for words from the academic word list that you can use in the context of talking about these topics. It gives you a sentence to show a context, and it even gives common expressions and phrases. So for example, the third row down is the academic word individual, and shows you how you can work this word individual into talking about containers and packages if you're talking about that topic with your students. What I like about this is some of these words may already be coming up naturally, but I feel like referring to this resource is a good reminder of which words we should really be making sure that students know, because they're words that are academic and they're words that they're going to run across in their life. So as we're all teaching online now, and probably most of us for the fall as well, we wanted to show that how you can still push this rigorous instruction even in online classes. So you can teach these words, these academic words, still in online classes. You can introduce them, and again, we recommend just a few at a time. Don't flood students with entire lists of academic words, especially your low-level students. But you can introduce them in, live synchronous Zoom lessons or in pre-recorded videos and PowerPoints. This is a resource that I've used and I've loved with my students is use Quizlet. And of course, you can still use Quizlet in in-person classes as a resource. But what I do is I create one list of academic words for the semester. And as a class, we add 2 or 3 words every week. And then that way students have this resource. They have the list of their words and they can go back and practice it. And it's some really nice built-in spaced repetition for students. And they keep on seeing these words, these academic words over and over again. You can also post asynchronous warm-ups to review words. At HCC, we use the learning management system Canvas. So if you're using something like that with your students, every couple weeks I would post a warm-up and pull 4 or 5 of the academic words from our running list and just do a simple gap fill or a matching just to get students used to those words. This is another idea I really like if you're having synchronous online classes through Zoom or another platform. Review a few of your academic words at the beginning of the lesson and then challenge students to naturally use 1 or 2 of these words during the class in their natural speaking.
All right. Gina, is there anything in the chat that we should know about right now or in the questions?
No questions right now, but I will certainly keep you updated as things come up. We did have a number of people introduce themselves, so thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah, I wish I could see what you guys were saying, but thanks for being here. We appreciate it. We'll assume that you're actually here.
Absolutely, and we did have a couple of questions about the links, and I wanted to let people know, like Nikki had mentioned, we will be sharing the presentations at the end of the sessions, but please continue to utilize the question panel if you do have questions or need to respond to anything.
Awesome. So as we are continuing to talk about these strategies, we covered academic language, and that really gets integrated into this whole discussion. But I want to talk about critical thinking. We want to get our students to do more than just memorize or answer comprehension questions. Critical thinking is a key skill for students, and it can be very easily integrated into pre-existing lessons. I think most of us are probably familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, which there's 2 different models on the screen right now. And if you're not, right, it demonstrates some ways we can move beyond the basics. And again, just to emphasize, that's not to say that lower levels of thinking aren't important, right? Memorization definitely has its place. Answering comprehension questions has its place. Our basic foundations, our basic levels have a foundation and provide a scaffolding for higher order thinking skills. We just don't want to stay at the bottom. So just to get, was that something for me? No? Okay. Starting from the bottom and working our way up, we can create different activities that require less or more critical thinking skills. So for example, if we're looking at remember, students recall spelling patterns for long A words by completing a chart. For understand, students summarize a short reading passage either in writing or orally. For apply, students perform a role play about a particular situation. For analyze, students complete a Venn diagram comparing their home country to the US. For evaluate, students write an email to a friend giving them advice. For create, students develop an advertisement for a food project. Food product, I think I said project. Okay, so we tend to have a harder time moving up Bloom's taxonomy with our lower level students. So let's look at this more in depth with a specific example. Here we have this activity called Pictures with a Purpose, which is a great way to encourage students to analyze. This activity comes from a blog post published by Oxford University Press, and it's awesome. So we're starting with a picture. Maybe it's from a textbook that you already have, or maybe it's just one you found online. And then instead of just asking basic comprehension questions like, what color is the man's shirt? Or who is smiling? We're going to get students to engage in critical thinking skills by asking more open-ended questions. So some examples would be, are they happy to be at the family reunion? Then we can make this more rigorous by going back to what Nikki was talking about and asking students to cite their evidence. For lower level students, this may just be pointing at something in the picture. And these are really valuable skills that students will need to rely on later when they're looking at the text and longer text, bigger text. So another example might be, is the food from a restaurant or is it from home? How do you know what's your evidence? Again, I love this idea that you don't necessarily need to use the word cite or evidence or support with your lower level students, but you're getting them to start thinking by saying, how do you know, right? Going back to the text. And again, take into consideration your student's level. And this is going to be something you'll want to model first, but it's a great activity. What I love about this activity is that it's just the beginning. You could use this to springboard at a lot of different activities from that. For example, you can ask students questions that require them to do higher level thinking, things like making inferences or applying something to their own lives. So if you take a look at on the screen, I love this picture of this little guy. You just know that he's up to no good here. Now, asking students a question like, what would you do if you saw this child? It's going to spark some interesting conversation as well as some critical thinking. It might end up even helping you compare and contrast different cultural responses. Now, to make this a little more accessible, you could provide some sentence frames or options. For example, I would talk to him and say, or I would speak to his parents and say, or I would do nothing because. So for beginners, you could even have them physically move to different areas to show what they would do. And then as a group, work together to say, well, how would you finish answering that question? And then practicing the language you'd use. So you can even take this beyond that one step further by having students vote on what they would do. And then you could create charts and graphs based on what they're actually doing in class. And this is an opportunity to get them to practice interpreting those charts, which is a really valuable skill. It comes up on CASA's test. If they have children in elementary, middle, or high school, it's on their score reports. Newspapers, we see it all the time. And there's a high tech and low tech option here, right? You could just draw it on the board if you're back in the classroom, or you can do it on Excel. I've actually done this with my students in the class and just charted it in Excel, and we did it right then and there. So it's a really good opportunity too to integrate that academic language that Nikki was talking about. And she's actually going to give a few more examples of how you might use charts and data in discussion. But you'll have to wait for a second for that. So if you're teaching in a remote context, there's a few ways you can easily adapt this particular activity. Right. As Nikki mentioned, we have Canvas, but if you have an LMS of some sort, you can post a picture and have students write their responses. If you are doing live meetings like WebEx or Zoom or one of the other platforms that there are, you could poll students or even just have them, raise their hand, give you a thumbs up, something like that. To get students to elaborate and discuss, you can have a whole class discussion, or if there is like a breakout room, and that breakout room feature in Zoom, that could be a good way to, really get some deeper discussion going on.
Okay, I'm going to share another idea for promoting critical thinking skills. Something we really like and we're using a lot at HCC are data collection activities. So these are great not only to get students to practice their oral language abilities, but they also tap into a lot of different layers of critical thinking skills. So students can compare, they can restate, investigate, synthesize, categorize, use those charts that Katie was mentioning. So we want to share today a version of a data collection activity called the one question survey. Maybe a lot of you have used them before or have heard of that. But what a one question survey strives to do is not to just get students to collect the data, but it strives to get information from every student in the class. So you have a representative sample that then you can then talk about as a class and graph and chart as a class. So for example, this survey that's up here on the screen is something pretty common that, comes with a lot of ESL textbooks. It came with my, we use the Future series. So it came in the Future series, an injury survey. So did you ever break your leg? Did you ever sprain your wrist? And a lot of times we send students off, we say, okay, answer it for yourself and then go ask 4 or 5 students, which is great. It's great oral language practice for them. They get to tally some results, but at the end, you don't really have a representative sample of your whole class. Maybe one student went and talked to 4 students that said, no, they never broke their leg. But a different student talked to 4 other students and got 4 yeses that they had broke their leg. So you can't really come together and do something with that data at the end. So a one question survey kind of solves that problem. So go ahead, Katie. So I'm going to share 2 different ways that you can approach this one question survey, and we're going to kind of go into details about how you can do it. So one way you can do it is with small groups. So for this way, students ask and answer a more limited amount of times. They might be in a group with 3 to 4 of their peers. They tally the results together in their small group. It's good to use with single questions. If you have one question you want the answer to, like we're going to see an example, like how do you prefer to learn? Do you prefer to learn alone, in a partner, or with a small group? So the small groups are good for answering just one question. Or this is my favorite way to do it. You can do a whole class mingle. So in the whole class mingle, students ask everyone in the class their question, and they also answer everyone else's questions. Students can tally their results together for their questions in a small group. And it's good for multiple questions. So I've used this before for an example that we're going to see for the injury survey. Oh, and the downside is it takes some more prep and it takes some more class time with the whole class mingle. So we'll look at this in a little more detail. So how you do it, the one question survey for small groups. It can be multiple questions. And in that case, I would give 1 question per student. So if you have a group of 3 to 4 students, I would give them the injury survey, and 1 student would have, did you ever break your leg? 1 student would have, did you ever sprain your wrist? 1 student would have, did you ever break your arm? And so on. With this way, you might have to have a student double up on a question if you have unequal groups, like maybe you have a group of 3 students and a group of 4 students. In that group of 3, 1 student would have to ask 2 questions. Or you can just try and get the answer to 1 question. Do you prefer to work alone, with a partner, or with a small group of colleagues? And in this case, I would have each student take a turn asking the student to their right. So the 1 student would ask the student to their right, record the answer. That student would ask the student to their right, etc. So in small group, they tally their small group's replies. But then you have to come back together as a whole class to add each group's up, so you get the whole class's results. So the whole class mingle. Each student, the way you would do this is each student gets assigned a number and they get a tally sheet. So I like to use sticky notes, and just before the class starts, if I have 22 students on my roster, I will write, numbers 1 through 22 on a sticky note, and when students come in, I would post it like right on their chest or somewhere visible. You need to see the number, and then each student gets a tally sheet. If you use multiple questions, you can group them together with a symbol or a color. For this example, I used 8 questions about injuries. Did you ever break your leg, sprain your wrist, break your arm, etc.? And I had a class of 22 students. So there were doubles of some questions. Did you ever break your leg might have gone to 3 students, which is actually great and okay. We're going to talk about how that enables students to work together in a group. So students mingle and they make sure they talk to each number on their list. So they have to ask their question 22 times and answer a question 22 times. So it's great for fluency. Then students can go to their question group. So the 3 students that had the question, did you break your leg, go together as a group. This is a great chance for them to check each other's tally sheets. Make sure, number 3 said yes, and make sure that's the same on each of their tally sheets. If it's not, it's a great chance for then students to go find number 3 and verify what was your answer, yes or no. And then finally, as a full class, you can collect the results from each of the groups and analyze the data. And this is what I think is really exciting. Because you have the whole class's results, you can practice some academic language and practice reporting and analyzing the data. So we can do this even for very low-level students. So if you use some language stems and some scaffolding and a lot of modeling, this is accessible even for our lowest level ESL students. So for example, I provided these language stems to help students report out, blank number of people in our class burned their finger, or blank number of people in our class didn't sprain their ankle. And this is a slide from another presentation about the 1 question survey by Jamie Adelson Goldstein. And she also has some great ideas for how to use, how to push in some academic language and some language frames and language stems to help talk about data. Again, I wouldn't recommend using all of these at once with your students, but if you do an activity like this a few times throughout your class, you can introduce some of these chunks of academic language. And then finally, we can stretch all those skills by analyzing the data. We can do this in low-tech ways in the classroom. There's kind of a small picture here of a bar graph I made in my class. And this was the example where we did a whole class mingle. And then students, 1 student from each group had to come up and physically draw their bar graph to represent how many people cut a finger in their tally. Or you can do this electronically. You can, put these slides together live in either PowerPoint or Google Slides. What I like about the pie graph is it even calculates, if you put the numbers in, it calculates the percentages for you. So a little bit less math you have to do on the fly. And I also like this too, that you can have students, before you do the surveys, you can have students make predictions about what they think will happen. I asked my class, what do you think the most common injury will be? Or for example, how do you think most people in the class would like to work? And then after the survey is done, as part of analyzing that data, we can return to the predictions that students made. Were their predictions correct? And you can even take it a step further and do some investigation of why. Why do you think cut your finger and burn your hand were the most common injuries? And you know, students, it's higher level academic thinking, but students had an answer for this. They just might have needed some language to help them like coach how to say it. We wanted to share a couple of variations from teachers at HCC. So we gave this presentation to a similar presentation to our teachers, and they took a lot of these ideas. Some of them were already doing some of these things, but they took a lot of these ideas and they went with it this semester and reported back what they had tried. So for our lowest level students, a way to get them used to these surveys could be to start with a 4 corners like activity. And Katie kind of mentioned doing this too. One of our teachers starts a lot of her classes with a simple poll like, what is your favorite food? And she'll put 4 different foods, post them up in the 4 corners of the room, and students just have to physically stand up and walk to the corner, which is their response. And then that way, as a full class, you can count, and then you can, you know, make a bar graph or a pie graph to analyze that data. On the other end, one of our teachers that was teaching ESL for GED social studies used something similar to model how a caucus would work back, gosh, I guess it was just in the fall or for elections. I think I got a little picture there. Yeah, but again, another example of food, she did your favorite ice cream flavor. And you know, to model how a caucus works, she had a student that she assigned to each corner, maybe A, B, C, D, and that student was trying to convince the rest of the class to come to their corner. Oh, you know, vanilla is the best flavor, and trying to encourage people to come to their corner. So again, students physically move to the corner of the ice cream flavor they chose. You tally and graph the results, and then I'm actually not sure what the percentage breakoff is for different caucuses, but you calculate, do a little bit of math, calculate the percentage, and then you would take away, you know, the choices that don't meet a certain threshold, and then students physically vote again, you know, for maybe the 3 choices, and so on and so on. Okay, and finally, because we're in an online environment, some online adaptations that you can do. So the activity is a bit harder to take online, but we do have some ideas for doing it. It works better with a small group. Unfortunately, the class mingle doesn't quite work. For Zoom or live video classes, you can use breakout rooms and assign those small groups to go answer the questions or ask and answer the questions and tally them in small groups, and then pull the students back into one group to tally the whole class's results together. You can also use this idea for a discussion board. So students would already have to be familiar with how to, you know, report the results or do a graph, but you can assign a question, and then every student has to answer that question in writing on a discussion board. And then after every student writes in their answer on the discussion board, students are tasked with individually tallying that themselves at home, counting up the yeses or the nos, or the, you know, do you prefer to work online with a partner or in a group? And then students have to report the results to you, and you know, you can ask students to report the results using a language stem, or even ask students to report the results using a graph that they make. Okay. So the final aspect of rigorous instruction we wanted to talk about today was using language strategies. So we probably, most of us as teachers, use and teach a lot of these strategies. They probably come as second nature to us, but if you haven't been explicitly taught them, or maybe you come from cultures with different approaches to text, they may not be as natural. So language strategies are something we need to explicitly teach and model for our students. I'm not quite sure how the chat will work, but we did want to kind of ask you to share some of your ideas. So we'll see if we can see any of these, but I'll give you an example. So for example, if your students are going to read this passage, this is very short. It's from it's from an intro level, like a pre-beginning level textbook. What language strategies would you have students use to aid in their comprehension? So to help students make sense of this text right here, what strategies might you have students use? We'll see if you can chime in with some ideas. I don't think Katie and I can see it, but maybe Gina can. We'll wait a minute.
We have a response from Sheila. I asked students to no. I'm so sorry. She said, I asked students to circle words that are unknown.
Oh, yeah,
that's a great one. Yeah. Anybody else?
We have a response from Linda, and she said, ask what the topic sentence is.
Great, yeah, identifying the different parts of the text, yeah. Identifying a main idea. Mm-hmm.
And then we have, when we use that as a jump off point and to discuss vocabulary. So either, I'm assuming, Dora, you're responding to what Linda said, ask what the topic sentence is, and then continue the conversation from there. Yes, okay, perfect.
Yeah, great. Yeah, identifying the topic. I mean, you can see there's a theme of transportation here, right? And then you can categorize and group the vocabulary in here.
Yep, so we have circle unfamiliar words, ask students to identify the transportation words since those are the key details. We also have identify word categories such as travel. We see bus, subway, taxi. We have show pictures of challenging vocabulary. So we have a lot of really great suggestions here.
That's awesome. Thank you all for chiming in. Okay, so we can click to the next slide, Katie. So I love this chart. This chart comes from a Link's issue brief, basically about rigorous instruction. I like it because it shows us strategies, and it gives kind of a specific example for how students use these strategies. I do want to say the heading for this chart is strategies for accessing complex oral and written texts. And we would posit that these strategies, we can be modeling how to use them for even simple texts, like the text we just saw about Muhammad. And it's something that if students get used to using these strategies on simpler texts, then when they get to the complex oral and written texts, it's kind of more automatic for them to go back to these strategies. So you guys mentioned, several of these in different ways, using context clues, using pictures for the vocabulary, drawing on prior knowledge, right? Talking about this as transportation. So there's lots of great ideas. There's lots of language strategies you can use. One that we wanted to highlight in this presentation, and you can click to the next slide, Katie, is using graphic organizers. And we think graphic organizers are great for helping students learn those strategies like how to summarize, how to compare, contrast, synthesize, analyze. And it's something that I'm trying to push into a lot of my teaching, even with simple text. I think we don't often think that simple text needs something like this, but it's a great to model on simple text, and then students can take that to more complicated things. So for example, even for a small text like this, you can have a simple graphic organizer that students can fill out, and it helps them to organize what they're processing when they read this text. So, you know, in his country, in the US, and then the different ways he takes transportation. And for a lot of students, seeing it visually like this can help them see that comparison more than they can see it in this block of text. So we're going to look at a couple ways that you can simply push in graphic organizers to what you already have, you know, in your curriculum. So here's another example from a text that we use at HCC. We use this one for high beginners, low intermediate students. So the book comes with this reading. It's a piece of writing comparing a student's hometown to where they live now. And the book comes with these comprehension questions. I think the comprehension questions are still useful. This is also from a writing course, so it's good writing practice for our students to write out a complete sentence. But a graphic organizer that students can complete first can help them organize and compare what they've processed from this reading. So what I love about this is something like this can be no prep for you as a teacher. I've simply drawn these graphic organizers and charts on the board and asked students right then and there to copy them down in their book themselves. So for something like this, I would have students copy down this graphic organizer comparing Beacon and Boston, and I would ask them before they answer their comprehension questions to list the adjectives that describe each of the hometowns. So again, they can still do the, you know, the sentences, the comprehension questions in the book, but using a graphic organizer like this first can help them process what they've read from this text. Okay, here's an example from a listening text. So I think we often don't think, we might often use graphic organizers with reading and writing, but we don't use them, at least in my experience, before I started intentionally pushing them in, we don't often use them as much with listening text. And I wanted to show how we can do this for even a pretty simple listening text. So you can see on the left is what the students get in their book. This is from the future textbook. You know, there's a prediction and there's some comprehension questions for listening, and there's a picture. And then over here on the right, just so you can see it, is the audio transcript. It's a very short conversation. It's 2 lines per person. They're talking about children, and they're talking about ages of the children. They ask how old they are, and they also ask what grade they're in. So students are going to be hearing some numbers, and it's going to be confusing for them, or it can be confusing for them to separate out the grade and the ages. So again, the book comes with comprehension questions here. If you can see on the left in part C, they're asking about the boy is in what grade and the girl is in what grade. And again, still use these comprehension questions. I think they're great. But before students answer those comprehension questions, you can have them fill out a graphic organizer as they listen. So a simple one like this, again, it can be something that you draw on the board and have students copy in their notebook. And as they listen, they can take notes and fill out the grade and the age of the son and the daughter. Again, it may seem simple, but if we get students used to using these strategies and these graphic organizers for these simpler texts, it's something that they can carry over when they access longer and more complicated texts.
I love that that it really encourages students to go back to the text, because with higher level students that I've taught before, sometimes you're like, where are you getting that answer from? So it really does, you know, teach them to go back to the text, and starting early is great.
And of course, online adaptation. You can still teach language strategies through online instruction, and you can still teach and model using graphic organizers. So you can do this through synchronous classes. Like if you have a live Zoom class, you can model, draw on the Zoom whiteboard, or even if you're not super tech savvy, you know, write on a piece of paper and hold it up, a graphic organizer, and ask students to copy it down themselves. Or if you do videos for your students, you can model how to fill in a graphic organizer that way. And this isn't for the comprehension part, but to model for students how to use graphic organizers, you can give them multi-step assignments for writing activities. Even simple paragraphs, you can first have them submit a graphic organizer as an assignment first. You know, you can check it over as they plan their writing, and then the second part of the assignment is to actually, you know, send you their writing.
All right. Well, that has been the majority of what we, or I guess that's all of what we have. So I really do hope that this presentation has helped to underscore the importance of rigorous instruction and provided you with some concrete examples and inspiration. We'll take questions in just a moment. But I just want to offer a few resources. If this is a topic you're really interested in and you want to continue to delve into, I really encourage you to check out the Links Professional Development course on increasing rigor. They have that issue brief that we reference in there. And there are a lot of other resources that we've shared with you today that are, again, on this slide and that you'll get access to. So yeah, please consider what you're already doing and how can you adapt it to better suit the needs of your students by providing rigorous instruction. I know that's something that Nikki and I are continually trying to do in our own classes and with our instructors as well. So questions, we would love to answer any if you have some.
Or comments, or if you have something to share that you've done, you know, with your students.
So we have a number of questions from people asking for a copy of the presentation. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and in the chat box put the link to the links training that Katie was referencing. So links is an adult education professional learning portal that is totally freely available. So if you're not familiar with links, lincs.ed.gov, there's a tremendous amount of adult education related resources that is pretty much the repository for the Department of Education. So that was, thank you for the online adaptation activities. We had a lot of really, really wonderful comments while you were asking the questions about the style of travel. And one that I really enjoyed from Karen is, if you were Muhammad, which style of travel would you prefer and why? It's like the relatability of it is just a fabulous perspective. So I thought, wow, that was really great. Thanks for sharing.
Really like that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, we'll take note of that one. That was wonderful. So we also have people asking for proof of participation. If you plan to attend multiple sessions, I ask that you do proof of participation for all of them at the same time because it's one form. But if you guys don't mind, if you can do this, I just put a link in the chat. That is a feedback survey so that we can get feedback on how this presentation was for you. We really appreciate it. Lots of accolades. Thank you for a very organized presentation. Okay, let's see. I see that people don't see the chat. Did you get a link to the Google thing that I put? Okay, no. All right. Yes, I see the links you're adding. Okay, fabulous. Okay, so the second one is a feedback survey. But if there are any additional questions, we will take them now. Otherwise, I would ask you to just refer back to the website, the Virtual Training Institute website, and that will have a form for proof of participation in a feedback survey. And that link is here.
And I just put in my, well, I just did it to you guys. I didn't do it to everyone. Tried to send it, put in my email. So if, Tina, if you don't mind sending that to everyone, if anyone has any questions later.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much. This was a wonderful presentation. The content was fabulous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself on mute and leave you guys up for a couple minutes. So you're welcome to log off Well, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay. I think we're good. All right. I don't know how to